Hello and welcome again to another edition of the Recovering Engineer. This is Connor James Hill, your host, podcast extraordinaire, professional engineer, and so on and so forth. Actually, today I would like to start off with what I would like to consider my own, not really my own because I did see it in some sort of a dictionary, whether online or somewhere else, definition for the word engineer. And so typically, especially with the modern colloquial usage of engineer, it has something to do with technology. I'm actually going to nil that. And as far as we're considered here at the Recovering Engineer, engineer is being an engineer, doing engineering, and engineering is the art, is bringing something about in an artful and or skillful manner. So for those of you out there, you don't have to have an engineering degree, but today on our show, we actually do have someone with an engineering degree. And again, it's another person who, to my knowledge, you're no longer doing any more engineering stuff. As far as like a 50-hour-a-week job or something, or as much as when I say that, it's like this hatred towards the engineering jobs and the working for the government maybe, or however that may turn out. We've got Pam McDowell. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you for joining me today, Pam. And just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Your question, am I currently working as an engineer? And no, I'm not. I live in Australia, but as you can tell, I'm not from around here. Originally from the US, Colorado, and grew up in Western Colorado, studied engineering at the University of Colorado in Boulder, so the other side of the state. And then
which is a quite prestigious civil engineering school, is it not? Or did you do civil engineering? Which engineering?
No, I'm not civil. It's got a very good engineering school, and it is also one of the schools that has an aerospace program, and that's what I studied, aerospace engineering.
Nice. So I love saying this because a lot of people involved in aerospace and pilots really enjoy when I say this, but like partially the entire reason I'm from the city and state of Wichita, Kansas, is because my dad's dad was a mechanical engineer for Cessna.
Really?
Yeah. So for those of you out there in the world that don't know what Cessna is, it is actually the largest manufacturer of a specific, I think to my knowledge, the 142 Cessna is still the largest produced airplane to date. Maybe something has surpassed it more recently. But yeah, so, and actually I recently found out from a pilot that Cessna comes from a guy created, this is to my knowledge, you can correct me, Pam, really made a lot of headway as far as airfoil design for aircraft. And so it's mostly for you out there that don't know the world of aviation. It's mostly small personal aircraft and then some like business, a little bit larger business and corporate and private jets type of a thing.
Yeah. And well, that's pretty cool. When I was at uni, I actually learned to fly. And I say uni as opposed to college because I've been living in Australia for 10 years. But I learned to fly, and I learned to fly in a Cessna 152, which is a two-seater airplane, smaller than most cars when you take off the wings. You don't take off the wings, but if you exclude the wings, it's a pretty small little plane. And so in Boulder, so we're already at about a mile high, and you're definitely, planes behave differently at the higher altitude. So you can't go a whole lot higher in a really small engine like that.
And not only that,
But
to my
yeah.
knowledge, because I did a lot of skydiving out of Longmont in Colorado, and not only are you
Oh,
at
okay.
not only are you at more than a mile, which for those of you out there is about 1.6 kilometers, a mile higher than mean sea level. The altitude equivalence is actually normally more about 8,000 to 8,500 feet. So more like 2 kilometers rather than 1.6, just based on the thinness of the air. For those of you out there that want to.
Yeah. And that during the summertime, which is, I imagine, when you're doing your skydiving, otherwise it'd be pretty chilly.
It does get cold.
During the nicer weather is when the altitude equivalent actually goes up. So, you know, the warmer air, less dense, and wow, we're really geeking out here.
That's fine. Keep going.
This is cool.
Yeah.
All right. And yeah, so I remember a story of one of my fellow students who was a pilot. So when I was at university, he was also studying aerospace engineering, and he was a pilot. And he was telling me about one time he went to one of the towns in the mountains in Colorado. And in the afternoon, when he went to leave, he actually had to do laps back and forward across the valley to get enough altitude to be able to fly back over the mountains and land in Longmont, because I think that's, oh wait, no, he was doing Jeffco. So yeah, one of the other airports in the area.
Uh-huh. Cool. So do you still have your pilot's license? Are you able to fly here in Australia?
Well, I don't think you ever actually lose your pilot's license, but my pilot's license is not current because I haven't had recency of experience and don't have a medical and things like that. Right. And so I'm not set up to fly here. I've looked at it a couple times and then, you know, like, okay, well, no big deal, but maybe someday.
Cool. So I'm curious I love that I didn't even know what background you were with engineering, and typically too, because these type of sort of quote unquote interviews, I like to dive into them without knowing much about you, so it's new for me as well as everybody else. From what I know, as far as the aviation industry is concerned, like in Wichita, Kansas, it's extremely up and down. So would you like to talk a little bit about maybe what either drove you to engineering as a youngster, and then maybe either away, or what gravitated away, or like, we don't have to talk about it in a manner of that you left it, but maybe what your experience has been, not, you know, working a full-time job as an engineer or something, like, because I think the last episode that we did with Dan, he talked about just how much he sort of wasn't at a quote unquote he wasn't at a job for about 5 years. And when he went back to get a job again, it wasn't an issue that he hadn't had a job for 5 years. And so many people, especially that I saw in a lot of the jobs I worked, people are just scared to leave their job because they're afraid they're not going to get another one. So that's a side note, as I like to go on tangents. Tell us more about your story, Miss Pam.
Okay. Well, as far as how I got started, I was coming up. I think it was in my junior or senior year, even senior year of high school, and wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. You know, had a few interests, but I knew I was going to go to college, but I didn't know exactly where or what I was going to do. And my swim coach actually started asking me, so what do you plan? Well, I've thought about this, I've thought about that. And it's like, well, what would you really like to do? And I'd like to be an astronaut. It's like, okay, well, just, you know, check out a few of these things. And so it might have been my junior year. I have no idea. But yeah, so long story short, I wound up at the University of Colorado, which has a pretty big aerospace department. And of the public universities had the most people go on, graduates go on to become astronauts. So I was like, okay, well, sounds like a good plan to me. It was pretty convenient. It was, that's what I did. And so I studied aerospace engineering, learned to fly when I was at uni. I had a friend who had just gotten his instructor certificate and was looking for volunteers, so it worked out pretty well. And so I just had to pay for the plane. And then when I graduated, it was in 1995. And at that time, people weren't hiring. Aerospace was in a slump.
Yeah.
But I had gotten an internship with the Boeing company in Seattle, which is like a really prestigious internship program. And it was amazing. They put on a really good, or they used to, I don't know what they do now, but they really have a great program.
Yeah.
And so I had done that the summer before I actually graduated, and I graduated in December. And then they hired me on into the group that I had been in, which wasn't really, it wasn't working with rockets or anything spacey. It was doing repair processes and R&D with composites, working with composite materials and looking at how you can use them to repair things, and also aging aircraft.
Interesting.
And other military systems. Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen with aging structures.
And I would like to just, one of the things that I found most interesting for the rest of the world out there, when you're flying in an airplane and when you see an airplane, if you've never been inside one, the windows are oval, you'll notice. And so the reason that is actually because the airplanes themselves actually bend and distort and torque and twist constantly throughout flight and constantly throughout their lifetime. And all that bending, twisting, contortioning, slight movements throughout time, if they had a square window, and when they actually originally built airplanes, they started putting square windows in them, the stresses, like internal stresses within the aluminum fuselage, actually get concentrated into a single corner within that window, and over time it tends to crack and put a crack there, which actually then even farther over time really could lead to a catastrophic failure of the entire aircraft. So essentially your windows are rounded so that at the edge it's rounded to ease out the internal tensions across that surface area of the aircraft. And again, Pam, add anything or correct me wherever I might be wrong, but that's, to my knowledge, why our windows are not square on an aircraft.
Yeah, well, I guess if I ever knew about the square windows being there in the first place, I've forgotten about it. But yeah, the stress concentrations are a huge issue with the plane, because yes, it's moving, and then you also have the thermal extremes. Yeah. Because when you go up to 40,000 feet, you're at minus 40 degrees, and it's fairly cold. And then you also have the pressurization. So yeah, so there's a lot of things. And unlike civil structures, aerospace structures are built with a very low comparable margin. So because you've got to have the weight down for them to be practical to ever get off the ground, they need to have as little material as possible, considering the design life and the expected loads. And then you also have inspection programs to keep an eye on everything, make sure the structure keeps up. So because of that, that high reliability, both in the space program and in the airplane area is that aerospace has such huge quality control.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's definitely, in terms of any industry, it's one of the highest quality controls you can imagine.
Yeah. Again, another thing, like most of my knowledge on aircraft and the aviation industry is like word of mouth, random stories, so on. But each piece on an aircraft, is this correct, is actually tracked with like an identification number, and any piece of an aircraft that is either replaced or removed or added has got to be tracked on each individual aircraft.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Like I think someone even told me like each screw, you're like, I took this screw off, I put a new one in, it's got to have like an identification number and when it was bought, sold, installed, and its use life and so on and so forth or something.
Yeah, I haven't worked in actual, the operations in, but I know like when I was on a later program, when I was on a rocket program, we actually, our fasteners had lots. So we wouldn't necessarily track every single fastener, but they were production lots. And then those production lots were tested. So you'd destructively test a number of items within that lot to make sure that the way they fail is as expected, so that the materials were all produced correctly. And then you'd have other non-destructive inspections just to make sure that they're all okay. But yeah, everything was recorded.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So before I because I'm getting excited as far as our future conversation for this podcast is concerned, before I move too fast, what else do you have to say about, as far as like, because you just said you later on with the rocket program, like what else would you like to add to what we've talked about so far?
Well, okay, so my first couple of years at the Boeing company were in this logistics R&D space, and then I went on to a rocket program, which had started, I saw first drawings for those like from the 70s, so I'd open up drawings, so it's like, this is a real drawing. But most of the design happened in the 80s, and I joined the program in the 90s when we were in our final few flights, and they were looking for some younger people to skill up and be able to cover people who might leave the program, either mid-career professionals looking to stretch their wings because they had only worked on this program since they first graduated, or other people looking to retire. So I got a very different experience than a lot of engineers on a larger program where, you might have somebody, designing a very small area of a plane. If you're in the, I was working as a mechanical designer, so someone like that might have a fairly small domain. But because of when I came on the program and the few number of people actually in the program, I was in the vehicle integration team. So I was working with, there were some structural things, but a lot of it was also how the vehicle physically integrates together. And so integration issues, structural issues, assembly issues, things like that. And then I also was equipment manager for some ordnance activated equipment. So got to deal a bit with explosives and the mechanical devices that are activated by explosives.
Oh, joy.
Yeah.
I love explosives. So, who doesn't love explosives?
Well, so when you have, on the vehicle I was on, so we had an explosive device that allowed the stages to separate. Yeah. So we had one that allowed our two stages to separate, but then we also had a different one that had us separate from the base launch vehicle. So it was an upper stage rocket that would go up on, an even larger rocket, and then we had our own separation structure, and then we had our internal separation, and then the spacecraft that would we would have its payload would have its own separation devices. And those are typically explosive devices. They're pretty reliable. Yeah. And then we also had the motors. They were the solid. I wasn't in charge of those.
So we do, like, we're at about 13 minutes to go. And as much as I'd love to turn this into a full conversation of rocket separation and explosive devices, I'm curious as to if there's a why. Yes. So actually I say if there's a why with a caveat, because I was at a level, so a part of the Recovering Engineer too is whenever I can, I will insert bits of the tools of Access Consciousness. And also a part, what Pam is doing these days is she has some sort of levels of certification as far as Access Consciousness is concerned. We'll talk about that in a second. And it's just that within the last year, I was at a choice of possibilities, and Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness, asked me, so how much did you learn and how much did they teach you throughout university and school for engineering to ask why? And I think my answer at the time was maybe 92%, or right now it's like 97%. Of the time is to ask why with just about everything. And now, if for any of you out there that, whether you're you're into science and so on, whether you're into rockets or whatever, is if you've discovered enough or researched enough or done enough access, you realize that there's some point in time you may realize, and it's talked about quite a bit, the effect the question why has. And it's really that we've got all sorts of question words, right? Why, how, what, when, where, and so on and so forth. But why and how are the two questions that don't actually create. In Access Consciousness, a question creates possibility. And the answer just comes to conclusion and doesn't actually create really anything. That's a long story in and of itself. But this realization of how much I had learned to ask why was sort of stripped away everything that I've sort of sought after with engineering, and I've instead begun to ask the question, what possibility does this create? So as far as engineering is concerned, like going back and instead of asking and like coming to solutions, being like, why does this work the way it does? Instead of asking, why does this work the way it does? I'm asking, what possibility does this create? So instead of trying to come to a single conclusion or a single answer, really discovering all the different possibilities that can be created from sort of one thing or maybe multiple things. I'm going that direction because I would like to ask Pam is, these days you're involved with Access Consciousness, you're doing Access Conscious things. What, how, when, why? I'm going to use that question, why, if there is a why to it. And maybe more, it's what possibility did it create? Actually, I'm going to change my why question to what possibility did you personally create when and how, again, how, we don't want to use that one, when and the choice you made to move away from aeronautical and aerospace and aviation and engineering into whatever, all the different things you're doing now.
Okay, boy, that's a big question.
I like big questions. Just like engineering projects.
So I left Boeing in Seattle when that program finished. I stayed on the program longer than I really had intended to because they offered some incentives, but I had at that point was saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I want something different. I wasn't quite clear on what, but I had also gotten more interested in renewable energy and sustainability and things like that. Wound up doing a little bit of freelance work for a couple companies, and then I studied yoga. Then I wound up in Australia, and then went to, not because of the yoga, but because of a guy I met. And then I decided to get a proper job, and I got some work in energy conservation at the local power company. And then I did some continuous improvement in there. So, wow. So what possibility? One of the things that, depending, and it really depends on what sort of engineering you are, is, you know, getting outside of the engineering box opens up a lot of different doors. Mm-hmm. And however, you know, jumping into that engineering experience opens up a lot of doors as well, because you learn a lot of things that other people don't, you know, in terms of, you know, concrete skills that can be handy if you're, you know, building technology of any sort. And where was I going with this? So,
don't you can go wherever you want. Doesn't matter.
I had a recognition throughout this that, you know, there was something else I wanted to explore, and, you know, the yoga was part of that, and then the Access Consciousness is something that a colleague of mine in Toastmasters said, you know, I was talking to her about an issue I had, and she's like, "Oh, you just need to get your bars run." I'm like, "What?" "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, that you just find a bars class, learn to run bars." And so I did, and I enjoyed it, but then I kind of, you know, lost interest and got stuck back into the job I was doing, and, you know, kind of that melee of not really enjoying it all that much. And then when I left that job, then I went to a Right Voice for You workshop, and I had aches and pains disappear by the end of the day. And I'm like, wait a minute, we weren't working on my aches and pains, we were working on voice. And so that's what got me asking a lot more questions, and, you know, taking the bars again, and foundation, and lots of other classes since then.
Cool. So what do you notice, if anything at all, that you may have a different point of view with? Like, do you really, is the question. Like, do you notice that, I'm not saying it's the case, do you notice that you may have a different point of view as far as everything is concerned with the tools of Access Consciousness? I would say due to your background, because the other part the rest of the world may not know is, like, you get into engineering. In civil engineering, you've got about 10% of civil engineers are women. And then as far as aerospace engineering in your field, what is it, like 1%, if not less?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the numbers are. I think on my particular program that I was on, the rocket program, it was probably like 2 of us, actual engineers. And then, yeah, I wouldn't have a clue as to what it is these days in that particular line of engineering.
So if there's not an answer to the question, that's fine too.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's plenty of statistics on that. I do know that when I was in engineering that, you know, I did think different than a lot of other engineers. I had a few other engineers that, you know, I would spend time with who saw the world differently as well. But I certainly knew that I perceived things differently. And even when I got into that slightly less technical world at the power company, I still realized that, you know, I perceived the world a lot differently, and, you know, not just the surface and the politics and all that stuff. There's so much more going on, but I didn't quite know what to do with it at that point. I don't know that I still know what to really clearly know what to do with it, but
did you ever really clearly know what to do with rockets?
No, not really.
Cool. So
I mean, yeah,
Yes, and I'm curious about this because I've looked at it with myself, like with all that kind of stuff. Like, did you notice the difference in energy you had when I was like, did you ever really know what you were doing with rockets? And you're like, oh, of course not. And it was super light, fun, and like you let go of sort of something. But then when talking about what you know, as far as whatever we were talking about before, it wasn't this like lightness thing. So what I'd like to tell people out there, for anyone brand spanking new to Access, or even if it's been ages, like you can still, this can still open up a light bulb, is the difference in the energy she just was, is really the difference of taking a point of view and having the lightness of something, of a question. So a lot of what I find with a lot of engineers, good ones, I should say, because you've got the different types of engineers that solely function from the numbers. And then you've got other engineers that function from the creation through question and just the joy of seeing what shows up. So that's why I asked Pam the question of, you know, did you ever really know what was going on with rockets? She did, as she said, and she didn't, because she didn't know what was going to show up, but you knew something.
Yes, yes. And right. Yeah, and yes. Yes, absolutely. And in some places there's that space of, you know, where we're going to discover what we know. And then, you know, other industries, you know, you got to know the answers. It's like, oh, it is heavy. It is heavy.
Yeah. And actually, see, there you go. Thank you so much. Because really, that's probably my favorite thing that I notice about maybe an engineering or a technical type industry is that, like, now that I've been involved in other industries, like specifically, let's say right now I'm a bartender, and people walk around like crazy talking about what they think will work in creating blah, 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 which is exactly what most engineers do. Only the difference is in engineering, like you have the application and then like an immediate response of whether or not you were correct. 99.9999999% of the time in engineering, you discover that you're not correct. And so you really have to just let go of whatever you think might show up before it shows up and just keep asking questions and keep trying different things and being surprised whenever something shows up that looks like it might be right. And then in other fields, like I said, like I'm bartending, people are like, what's going to get more people into this bar? And everybody's like, oh, we got to look like this, or we got to sell this, or we got to do that. That's what's going to work. And then because whatever, and then they can kind of in their own mind come up with why that was actually created, when all it is just a created mental reality within your own mind. Everything that brought up for everybody listening now and in the future, will you destroy and uncreate it all? Right, wrong, good, bad, pod, call 9 shorts, boys, and beyond. So I'd like to actually ask everybody out there, because this is really a thing I've been kind of playing with myself more recently, is what, just as Pam asked, is like, really, hopefully I'm not quoting entirely verbatim, but if you guys all like reverse maybe a few minutes and listen to what Pam said when she said, with rocket science, love it, fucking rocket science. That's what everybody uses that as the term of like, oh, this isn't rocket science, but actually it should be rocket science, because just as Pam said, discovering what you know. Like, you don't know, it's about knowing that you don't know, but it is about the discovery of what you know. So what if everybody out there, and what energy, space, and consciousness can you all be to be the space and energy of the joy of discovering what you know, when you know, and I'd like to say how you know. What does that? And that you know, not how you know, that you know. Energy, space, and consciousness can you be to know that you know and discover that you know, when you know, and that you know, and everything that doesn't allow it, times, guides, and we destroy and create it all. Right and wrong,
Yes,
good and
please.
bad, pod and pock, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that question.
Cool. So
I'll have
Pam,
to
how is
re-listen to this and write it down.
yeah, so how we actually are going to go over time here. We're like over by a minute. That's okay, because I kind of want to ask you a little bit more. Like, um, and as I'm about to ask the question, Pam, it's okay, Pam, and anyone else out there that does this, when I ask the question, like, what are you up to and what you're creating in Access? Because for a very long time, if someone asked me that question, I'd be like, I'm judging myself because I'm not creating nearly enough. Now, what we said previously is it's about being in the question. Maybe I kind of said it, maybe I implied it, but really Access Consciousness is always about being in the question. And if you ever say, I'm not creating enough, the question here is that a question? I'm going to just answer for you. It is not. I am not creating enough. It is an answer I have lived from for several years, and I still tend to wake up to with that answer in my head, and it never feels very good. So what we always want to do is take a question. If you have a question, I mean, if you have an answer that you're living from, see what you can do to turn it into a question. Like, I'm not creating enough. If you're saying that, maybe you can turn it into the question like, how much am I creating? What am I creating? And what would I like to create today to create the future I'd like to create right away? And if you're like, I don't know what future I'd like to create, again, that's an answer. So we're going to go back and go, what the fuck would I like to create today? Just like Pam talked about, we're going to turn it, we're actually going to make it rocket science and go, what the fuck would we like to do with this rocket? What's actually going to show up? Let's discover what we know. Woo! Everything
Nice question.
Yeah. So Pam, what are you up to?
Everything that brought up right, wrong, good, bad, pock, knowledge.
Pock and pod us, Pam. Pock and pod the fuck out of us.
Pock and pod.
Cool.
All right.
And so, if you guys want to know what Pock and pod is, just go to theclearingstatement.com and you'll find out information there. So Pam, let us know.
All right. So I have been a bars facilitator for maybe a year and a half. And I sometimes work with clients one-on-one. I've taken a number of access classes, including body and SOP. And I've taught a few body process classes. And actually have an internship with Joy of Business at the moment.
Nice.
And
rocket science and consciousness.
Yes, maybe people tell me I need to ham up this rocket science things, and I've resisted a bit, but yeah. So, anyway, so maybe. So I've done a little bit of English teaching, not full-time, regular. I've helped. I help people in their business sometimes. I helped a migration agent get through some reports or applications before they had to be put in, just random things things
nice.
that come up. Yeah. So I don't know what else. That's I would like to find out what else. So yeah. So it's opening doors all the time, and like, what can this create? What can this create? And same place, trying to stay out of that, oh my God, I'm not creating enough. Oh my God, the sky is falling.
Yeah, because I mean, like if we were working on a rocket and we said, oh my God, the rocket broke.
It's like, cool, what happened?
Yeah, exactly.
I used to love it when things go wrong, because then you get to find out what went wrong. It was awesome. Yeah.
Huh. Thank you for that statement. Now I realize why I have been so good at doing things wrong at the start of like all jobs. I can break something at a new job or a new thing that I'm doing that people have been doing for years and go like, wow, I've never seen that happen.
Oh my God. I do that sometimes too.
So for all the engineers out there, everywhere you create failures as a way to discover how to not fail, rather than knowing that how to thrive and when to thrive and where to thrive, will you destroy and uncreate it all? Right,
Yes,
wrong,
please.
good, bad, pod, poc, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. I mean, fucking A, what if we just got it correct the first time around? Maybe not even the first time around. But what we engineers tend to be taught, and what everybody tends to be taught in the world, is to search for the problem. Okay, here is the problem. Rather than what I like to look at, because I also do, and I've mentioned this on another call with extreme sports stuff that I do, is that like with snowboarding down a mountain through trees, if I looked at the quote unquote problems, which you could look at as trees, and be like, oh my God, don't hit the tree. It's a big problem. You'll fucking die. That would be an issue and I'd actually run into the tree. So instead of looking at the tree, you look at where you desire to go. You make the choice of this is where I'm going, and you acknowledge that the tree exists. You don't try and necessarily avoid it, but you spend far more energy and effort and joy and everything on where you're actually choosing to go. So everything that doesn't allow everybody out there to choose where they would like to go, everything that doesn't allow everybody to recognize that they actually have choice. What if your world wasn't determined by the forces and constraints of this physical reality? Everything that is, times a gazillion, destroy and uncreate it all. Right, wrong, good, bad, pod, poc, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. So another thing is too, is like me personally, I just want to put this out there is with, for those of you that are maybe technical people that are involved in either access consciousness or you got involved in metaphysics at some point in time, is for whatever reason, people in the metaphysical world tend to like to make you wrong if you're a technical person because you're like thinking too much or something. First off, we want to look at the thing of people always project and expect what they themselves are doing. And then the next thing is just pock and pot all that shit. So, and that just made me go blank. Cool. Now I've got a horse's head.
Everything that is, will you destroy and uncreate it, please?
Right, wrong, good, bad, pod, poc, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. Yeah. Woo! Because not just for engineers, like the thing I loved one time was there's a saying for all of you out there, if you know that you do go into the thinking or you notice yourself going into thinking too much or whatever because you're thinking and you're thinking and you're thinking and you're trying to think, even though we all know that the best design for engineering stuff comes when you're like laying in bed and you're just about to go to sleep and you're no longer thinking, and then all of a sudden it just goes right into your head and you're like, oh my God, this is the correct answer. And it's not really an answer, it's really just an awareness of what's actually going to create another possibility or greater possibilities or a different possibility, or actually create the possibility that you're looking for. I forgot. What was I saying?
Yeah, I was hoping you remembered where we were going with this.
I started somewhere and I totally forgot where I started because I think I smacked my hands together and it, whatever. Right. Is that, I had a, one time, like you were saying before, SOP. So for those of you out there that don't know, SOP is called Symphony of Possibilities. This is a class that Dr. Dane here instructs. You have to have several classes certified before you get there. Why? Because it's like trying to teach, my easiest way for this show, let's put it into terms, is it would be like trying to teach calculus to someone that doesn't even know how to do 2 + 2 yet. It's really imperative to go through the classes because it helps everybody else. If you're sitting in a calculus class asking what the heck 2 + 2 is, everybody else is going to be sitting there going, really? Come on now. Can they go back to the other class? So Symphony of Possibilities is a world where you get to discover your awareness of energy. And it looks different probably for freaking everybody. And this is really where I discovered that my capacity with engineering and why I was so good at kinematics and statics and dynamics in engineering was solely because of my awareness of the energy in the physical world. And damn it, again, I wiped my mind. So I was doing a symphony session on a lady that was a veterinarian, and she was just so in her head. I could just feel it, like all her energy, instead of being outward and aware and released and more possibilities, was contracted entirely into her, to within the confines of her head. And I said, right, wrong, good, bad, pop, pock, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds, which is the clearing statement. And she just goes, oh my God, what was that? That felt so good. Because literally the clearing statement itself is designed to break up. Imagine it like those little brilliant, reliable explosives that Pam talked about earlier to separate the stages of a rocket. That's like a point of a pock and potting something. You're going back to the point of creation and destroying everywhere you created a specific point of view, like maybe the point of view that you have to go into your head in order to create what you created, or the point of view that your head was ever the thing in the first place, like your mind that was ever the thing in the first place that created your capacity with design, architecture, engineering, anything scientific, anything that anywhere that you've ever bought, sold, and been lied to and implanted with the fact that your mind was the creator of anything you've ever designed or brought about or engineered, will you destroy and uncreate it all? And everything doesn't allow you to know and be aware of the fact that that was actually your awareness, that your willingness to receive, perceive, know, be, and have your awareness of what is possible, will you destroy and uncreate it all? Right, wrong, good, bad, pop, pock, all nine shorts, boys and beyonds. Yeah, thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you, Connor.
Woohoo!
Wow.
I really like this podcast.
Yes. I think that's engineers, not every engineer, but there's a lot of engineers and a lot of technical people out there sitting on a lot of brilliance and misidentifying where that brilliance comes from. And
meme.
And what would it create to actually unlock that?
Cool. And what would it take to unlock it? I think it might be choice. Good thing we've got a class in Access Consciousness called Choice of Possibilities. Don't choose it, people. It might create a life and living that you truly desire. And thank you so much, Pam, for coming on. This has been awesome. We're like, apparently when I first started doing these podcasts, I was like, I'm only going to do 30 minutes because that way, blah, 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 blah. Maybe now we're moving to 45. You know, it's anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. I don't care. I get to do what I want.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Any closing comments, questions, or anything out there, Miss Pam?
Oh, I just say, if you're technically inclined or if any of this resonates you, definitely check it out.
Get your bars run.
Get your bars run. Yeah, good place to start. And really start to find out what it is you know. This is awesome stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, Pam. Thank you so much for jumping on and being here with me. Yeah,
thank you, Connor. I enjoyed it.
All right, see you soon, and see everybody next time on The Recovering Engineer.